The tray hit the floor with a loud crash, scattering delicate raspberry tarts across the tiled bakery floor. For a moment, the chatter inside Morning Glory Bakery froze. Then came the laughter, sharp, biting, cruel. "Guess Frankenstein can't even carry pastries now," sneered Derek Collins, his construction crew howling behind him. Behind the counter, Isabella Torres stood still, her jaw tight, her breath held. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from restraint. Her hands, scarred and steady, slowly reached for a towel as she knelt to clean the mess. No one moved to help. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Morning Glory sat at the edge of Cedar Grove's main street, its window panes fogged from the early morning ovens and the smell of fresh bread drifting into the crisp air. Locals came for the sourdough, the cinnamon buns, the warmth of routine. But few stayed long enough to learn the rhythm behind the counter or the woman who kept it all turning. Isabella, 34, was always the first to arrive, unlocking the door at 4 a.m., tying her apron with mechanical precision, her movements quiet, rehearsed. Her scarred face, burned down the left side and trailing onto her neck, rarely turned toward customers. And when it did, it was met with sideways glances, hushed whispers, or worse, open mockery. Most just assumed she'd been in some kind of accident. No one asked. Fewer cared. Derek Collins never missed a morning dragging his muddy boots and loud crew through the doors at 7:01, sharp. For him, Isabella's face was a daily punchline. The others followed his lead, shouting, laughing, making comments they thought clever. But what no one saw, what no one knew, was what Isabella carried beneath her sleeves and behind her silence. A past sealed tight. A reason why she never reacted. A reason why, no matter how loud the jeers or how cruel the jokes, she held her tongue and kept baking. Because once her hands weren't shaping bread, they were disarming bombs. And the burns that now drew ridicule, they came from saving lives. That morning, as Isabella wiped frosting and broken pastry from the floor, Derek leaned in with a mocking smirk. "Bet you got those scars playing with an oven, huh?" She said nothing, not because she couldn't, but because she knew he wasn't worth the truth. What Isabella didn't know, what no one expected, was that someone had just walked through the door who would recognize the truth, and everything was about to change. Jack Ramsey had seen many things in his life, war, loss, redemption, but nothing had prepared him for what he saw that Thursday morning at the Morning Glory Bakery. The day had started like any other. The sun was barely up, and the bakery still smelled of cinnamon and rising dough. Jack, a retired Army medic and now a volunteer at the Cedar Grove VA clinic, stepped in for his usual black coffee and bran muffin. He had always appreciated the quiet hum of the place before the morning rush began. And more than anything, he respected how Isabella Torres, scarred, silent, and focused, moved behind the counter with the grace of someone who knew what pain was and refused to let it define her. He never pried. But he noticed things. Her left hand trembled slightly when reaching for the oven handle. Her eyes, though soft, always scanned the room like someone trained to anticipate danger. And then there was the tattoo. That morning, as Isabella reached across the counter to hand him his coffee, her sleeve slipped up slightly. Jack's eyes fell on the inner part of her forearm. There, partially faded but unmistakable, was a tattoo EOD in block letters, ringed by a military wreath. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. His heart froze. He had seen that tattoo once before, 15 years ago in Fallujah. During the worst firefight of his deployment, his convoy had been trapped by a string of IEDs. One woman, a combat tech they barely knew, had disarmed 6 bombs in a storm of gunfire. The 7th one partially detonated while she was still kneeling beside it. She had thrown her body between the blast and his team. Jack had never seen her again. His muffin sat untouched. He looked up at Isabella, who had returned to kneading dough, her face partly turned away. He studied her profile. The left side of her face bore deep burns, just like the soldier from that day. The movement of her hands, the steady rhythm, even the calm in her voice when taking orders, matched exactly. Jack's voice trembled. "Excuse me, Miss Torres." Isabella paused, but didn't turn around. "Yes." He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "Did you serve in Iraq?" She stiffened slightly, her shoulders rising, then falling. "Why do you ask?" Jack reached into his wallet, pulled out a small weathered photograph, one he kept folded behind his veteran ID. It was a blurry shot of a woman in a bomb suit kneeling beside a Humvee, wires tangled around her hands. "She saved us," he whispered, sliding the photo onto the counter. Isabella froze. Her hands dusted with flour, she looked at the picture. Her breath hitched. Jack continued softly. I've never forgotten her. None of us did. You threw yourself in front of that blast. We lived because of you. Slowly, Isabella picked up the photo. She studied it silently, the bakery's early morning light washing over her face. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. And I'm not her anymore. Jack shook his head. You're exactly her. That's why you survived. That's why you still show up here at 4 a.m. That's why you don't flinch when they say those awful things. She met his eyes then, for the first time really, and he saw the struggle behind them. They call me monster, freak, Scarface, they don't know. No, Jack said gently, but now I do. And that changes everything. Before she could respond, the bakery door opened. As always, Derek Collins and his crew barged in loud and crude, mud on their boots, laughter on their lips. One of them snickered. Hey, Frankenstein got anything edible today or just more nightmares on a plate? Jack's jaw tightened. Isabella said nothing. She returned to her work with shaking hands while the laughter continued. But Jack couldn't sit still anymore. He stood from his seat and walked straight to their table. Gentlemen, he said, his voice low but firm. Do you have any idea who you're mocking? Derek looked up amused. Old man, mind your coffee. I will, Jack said. Right after I introduce you to Staff Sergeant Isabella Torres, former EOD technician, U.S. Army. She's the reason I'm standing here. She's the reason 6 of us came home from Fallujah in 2008. The crew went silent. She disarmed 7 bombs under fire. 1 went off in her hands. She nearly died to protect soldiers like me. Like you would never be. Derek looked stunned. You're saying she... I'm not saying anything. Jack cut him off. I'm telling you. That woman back there baking your muffins is a hero, and every time you laugh at her scars, you're spitting on her sacrifice. The entire bakery had gone quiet. Even Isabella, who had been standing frozen behind the counter, slowly stepped forward. Jack turned to her. I'm sorry if I said too much. But people need to know. You shouldn't be hiding. You should be honored. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from shame. She took a breath, deep, steady, and for the first time in years, Isabella Torres stood tall. The tray of fresh cinnamon rolls crashed to the tile floor with a sound that sliced through the bakery like a gunshot. Glazed frosting smeared across the counter. Pieces of warm dough scattered. Isabella Torres stood frozen, her hands trembling, her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The silence that followed was louder than any insult. Customers stared. A few looked away in shame, but the cruel laughter that had caused the accident rang out again from near the coffee station. Derek Collins, the burly construction foreman, leaned on the counter with his usual smug grin. What's the matter, Frankenstein? Oven a little too hot this morning. His crew cackled on cue, tossing crude remarks like grenades. She probably saw her reflection. One of them snorted. Isabella knelt to pick up the shattered tray, trying to keep her face hidden behind her curtain of dark hair. Her cheeks burned not from embarrassment, but from the familiar, helpless rage. She had survived worse. So much worse. But something about today, the noise, the looks, the tray on the floor made her feel like she was drowning in it. Behind her, Jack Ramsey slowly stood. He had just come in for his usual black coffee and blueberry muffin like he did every morning. He wasn't wearing anything special, just an old flannel shirt and jeans, but something in his posture had shifted. His hands, once clasped around his coffee cup, were now clenched at his sides. His faded Vietnam veteran cap was slightly tilted back, revealing the deep crease in his brow. That's enough. Jack said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the laughter. Derek looked up, confused. Excuse me, I said. Jack repeated louder this time. That's enough. The bakery quieted. Even the espresso machine seemed to hush itself. Jack stepped forward, placing his coffee down gently on the nearest table. His eyes were locked on Derek, but his voice carried to everyone in the room. You think you're funny. You think mocking someone's scars makes you a man. Jack paused, then turned to the other patrons. Let me tell you something about that woman you've all been laughing at. Isabella stood slowly, her eyes wide, unsure of what was about to happen. Jack's voice was no longer angry. It was steady, reverent. 15 years ago in Fallujah, my SEAL team was ambushed. We were pinned down near a market by a series of IEDs, complex chained explosives, meant to kill everyone who approached. We were as good as dead until an EOD specialist showed up. Young woman, small frame, serious eyes. She worked for 18 straight hours under enemy fire, disarming one bomb after another while we covered her. Jack's voice grew tight with emotion. On the final device, something went wrong. It started to detonate early. She had a choice: run and save herself, or protect the men she barely knew. She threw herself on the bomb, took the blast with her own body. He looked at Isabella, then back to the stunned customers. Her name was Staff Sergeant Isabella Torres. That's right, the same woman you've been mocking for her scars. Gasps rippled through the bakery. Derek looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Jack reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a creased photograph. He walked forward and laid it on the table near Derek's untouched donut. The photo showed a young woman in full combat gear standing beside a SEAL team. Her face was unscarred then, but unmistakable. This woman saved 6 lives that day, including mine. And those scars you sneer at, they're the reason I'm standing here. They're the reason half a dozen kids still have their fathers. Derek's eyes dropped to the photo, then back to Isabella. His smirk was gone, replaced with stunned disbelief. Jack turned back to the room. I've been coming here every day for weeks, watching this woman work harder than anyone else in this place. Not once did she ask for thanks. Not once did she play the hero. She just wanted to live her life in peace. And you, he looked straight at Derek, you made it your mission to ruin that. No one moved. Even the sound of the oven timer seemed too loud. Isabella's hands were still trembling, but this time, it wasn't from shame. It was from the overwhelming rush of memories, of pain, of gratitude. Someone had remembered. Someone had seen. I didn't want anyone to know, she whispered, her voice cracking. Jack gave a gentle smile. Maybe not, but they needed to. Derek stood awkwardly, his mouth opening to speak, then closing again. He turned toward Isabella, his voice low. I'm sorry. We didn't know. You shouldn't have to know, Isabella replied, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. You just shouldn't treat people like that. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something had shifted in the air. Respect had entered the room like a storm front. Derek and his crew picked up their hard hats and quietly left. The photo of Isabella in uniform remained on the counter, and this time, no one looked at her the same way again. The moment Isabella Torres' story went public, everything changed in Cedar Grove. It spread like wildfire. Word of the scarred baker who saved 6 SEALs revealed by Vietnam veteran Jack Ramsey in that tiny Morning Glory bakery reverberated across the town. Local veterans flocked to the bakery, offering silent salutes, hugs, and gratitude. A wave of quiet pride swept through the community. What had been a place of mockery transformed into a place of honor. Donations came pouring in flowers, bakery supplies, even new uniforms from local clothiers. Veterans brought framed photos and dropped them in Isabella's lap, Purple Hearts commendations and letters from soldiers she'd never met, but whose lives she'd protected. The bakery walls, once bare, began to glow with ribbons and plaques honoring her sacrifice. Notably, Derek Collins, the same foreman who had tormented her, returned one evening with a somber expression and a check. He walked up to the counter, the clatter of plates fading as he cleared his throat. I can't change what I said, he began, voice low. But I can help. I want to fund a memorial display, something that honors your service right here. He gestured to the main wall near the ovens. Isabella was silent, but when she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. It wasn't just the funds, it was the recognition that even the darkest mockery could be redeemed. By the next morning, the memorial was in place, a display of service medals, photos of the Fallujah team, and a simple plaque with the words, in honor of Staff Sergeant Isabella Torres, EOD Specialist, a true hero, in plain sight. It became a stop for veterans who still stopped in to remember times that weighed heavy on their hearts. Isabella found herself less hidden. Where previously she'd been a face behind the pastries, she now took center stage, quietly, gracefully, as if she'd been waiting for this moment without knowing it. She began mentoring young veterans who came to the bakery, some just seeking coffee, others seeking who to trust. She listened. She shared. She taught resilience, reminding them that healing didn't mean return to who they were before, but discovery of who they could still become. Local veteran organizations invited her to resilience workshops. She hesitated at first, intimidated by the spotlight, but the message was bigger than her fear. At the first one, she spoke simply, "Scars don't disappear. They're part of us, but they don't define our value. Courage does. And sometimes the greatest strength looks like staying." Young veterans nodded as she spoke. A GI wearing a bandaged hand asked quietly, "How do you keep going when the pain lasts longer than you expected?" Isabella took a quiet breath and answered, "One pastry at a time. One day at a time. Let your hands remind you you can create warmth, even when you've seen fire." Even the children of Cedar Grove learned about her story. Schools brought classes to the bakery on field trips. Students asked questions, some curious, others reverent. "What did Scar feel like?" one boy asked. Isabella gently answered, "Like a story I couldn't erase, but I can choose how I tell it now." Morning Glory filled with laughter again, genuine laughter, not derision. Veterans telling stories of the war children tasting pastries with pride, neighbors offering to cover breakfast for any veteran who walked in, all because the town chose to see her sacrifice. Jack Ramsey remained a steady presence. Some mornings he'd sit across from her without saying a word, his salute hidden in the tilt of his head. Others he'd quietly remark on the rise of her bread or her choice of icing. Every gesture spoke volumes. She had saved him, and now she was saving others. Isabella's transformation wasn't flashy. It didn't come with fanfare or big announcements. It was quieter than that, but so much stronger. She was no longer invisible. One late afternoon, Isabella found herself kneading dough while the late sun painted the bakery golden. Jack entered to retrieve some donuts for the VA's volunteer brunch. He paused, watching her movements for a moment, then said softly, "You're doing what you were always made to do, nourishing people inside and out." She paused, looked at him and nodded. Sometimes heroism comes with flour on your hands. A year passed, but the warmth inside Morning Glory Bakery only grew. Where once there had been ridicule, there was now reverence. Each Sunday morning, a quiet line formed before the doors opened, veterans, families, and townspeople waiting not just for pastries, but for a moment with Isabella Torres. The woman who had once hidden behind ovens now stood before others with clarity, strength, and grace. Her scars remained visible, but so did her story, no longer whispered or buried. She wore it openly, proudly, not for sympathy, but as proof she had endured fire and kept baking. One afternoon, Isabella stood before a class of new military recruits at the local base. Dressed simply without rank or pretense, she faced them with calm authority. Her voice was steady as she said, "You don't stop serving just because you take off the uniform. You just find different ways to serve through kindness, through community, through courage that lasts long after the battlefield." She let the silence linger, the weight of her words settling in the room like a lesson carved in stone. After the session, a young recruit approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, does the pain ever really go away?" Isabella offered a soft smile. "No, but the meaning changes. It becomes something you carry, not something that crushes you." Back at the bakery, the memorial display continued to grow. Notes from soldiers, cards from schoolchildren, photos from families she'd never met. Testaments to lives touched not just by what Isabella had done in Fallujah, but by how she'd lived since. The very men who had once mocked her now waited in line to buy her coffee, shake her hand, and protect her dignity the way she had once protected theirs. Jack Ramsey remained a near-daily presence. On the anniversary of the day he revealed her past, he raised a simple toast in the bakery. To Isabella, the quiet hero who showed us all what real strength looks like. She blushed, but didn't shy away. "Not anymore. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism don't happen on battlefields, they unfold quietly in the steady rhythm of daily life." Isabella Torres reminds us that scars, whether visible or hidden, don't weaken us. They are proof of survival and of the courage to keep showing up. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Click like to show support for our veterans. Comment below if someone in your life inspires you with silent strength. And subscribe to our channel for more true stories that honor resilience, dignity, and humanity.